This is video 3 of the Psych 642 Mixed Designs assignment. So I'm going to pick up right where I left off at the end of the last video. You can see that R created all of the different graphs that I had specified for the interaction plots, presence of friends and amount of exercise, gender and amount of exercise, gender and presence of friends, and the interaction of all three: gender, presence of friends, and amount of exercise. In addition to doing those graphs, because the main effects were the only thing that were significant, I do want to create some bar graphs of the main effects. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for gender, exercise, as well as friends. You can see, once again, I'm using ggplot function to specify the data that will be in the graph. And I'm going to do 3 different graphs with the gender, exercise, and friends with an outcome of depression score. I'm still using the stat summary function to create the graphical objects, which in this case will be the bars and the error bars. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So in looking at this graph, we can see that difference by gender, where the males had significantly higher depression scores than females did overall. And then this graph allows us to see the effect of exercise. We could see that those that participated in exercise had significantly reduced scores compared to those with no exercise. And then finally, the friends. We can see that whether or not someone had friends with them did not seem to impact the depression score really at all. So I'm also going to get the descriptive statistics for all 3 of those, exercise, gender, and friends, just so I can have that for my summary. So I can have the means and standard deviations. So once again, here's the different exercise groups, the descriptive statistics for those, the different genders, and the different friends groups. And once again, just like before, I used the by function with depression score as the outcome variable. These is the predictor variables, and then the stat.desc function to get the descriptive statistics. So finally, the last thing that I'm going to do is get the effect size for the specific plane contrasts that I'll be reporting. Because it was only the main effects, really the only main effect that had a plane contrast that was significant. No, the only significant main effect that had a plane contrast was the exercise groups. So that's what I'm going to run the effect size for. Just like in the previous assignments, I'm going to use this bit of code to create a function called rContrast that will calculate the effect size from the t-scores and the degree of freedom. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And then I'm going to actually run the rContrast function for the information found in the exercise plane contrast. So no exercise versus exercise and 15 versus 30. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that gives me all of the information that I need to interpret what this experiment has told me. So with that being said, now I'm going to show a step-by-step walkthrough of where the information and the summary of findings came from out of the output. So the first thing that I point out in the summary of findings is that there was a significant main effect of gender on the score of depression, with males having significantly higher scores than females. So I've included the mean and standard deviations for males and females that I got towards the end, which can be seen right here, the mean and standard deviation for females and the mean and standard deviation for males, and that went in right there. Followed by the actual chi-squared information and the p-value, which can be found in the ANOVA results right here. So we see gender. We look at the line for gender here. We see the degrees of freedom difference between 14 and 13 is going to be 1, so that's where the 1 for degrees of freedom came from. And then the chi-squared for that is 15.18 with a p-value of 0.0001. So that specific main effect was significant. So next I looked at the engagement and exercise and how it significantly affected the score of depression. Once again, the chi-squared information from that came from these results here, which you can see in the exercise model line. The degrees of freedom, 7 minus 5 is 2, which is where the degrees of freedom for that came from, with a chi-squared value of 25.67 and p of less than 0.0001. So I also reported on whether the presence of friends impacted the depression scores, which these results show that it did not. And once again, the chi-square data from that comes from this line right here, the friends model. Once again, the difference in the degrees of freedom between it and the previous model is 2, with a chi-squared value of 0.23 and a p-value of 0.89. So it was definitely not significant. The means and standard deviations for those 3 groups that are reported in that sentence came from that same space down here. So the no friends mean standard deviation, 1 friend mean standard deviation, and then 2 friends mean standard deviation. If you look at these means, you can see that they're very close together. Next, I showed that there were no significant 2- or 3-way interaction effects, which once again can be seen from the results of the model. So the exercise and friends interaction was not significant, exercise and gender interaction was not significant, and friends and gender interaction was not significant. So all the 2-way interactions were not significant. And then the total model, which included the addition of the 3-way interaction, was also not significant. So the last thing that I pointed out was the plane contrasts, specifically the plane contrasts for exercise. I didn't do plane contrasts for friends because it wasn't significant, or they were done, which you can see down here. I'm just not going to spend a whole lot of time reporting on them because there was nothing significant from the model. So I'm specifically looking at exercise, also because gender was only the one comparison, so it's inherent in the model itself that one comparison was significant between males and females. So there's no need to break that down any further because it can't be broken down any further. So with all that being said, the last thing that I reported on is those playing contrasts. So I did find with those that depression scores after time spent exercising were significantly lower than when no exercise was completed. And you can see the information for that. The B, the T value, degrees of freedom, and P all came from right here. The B value is here. Degrees of freedom is here. The T value, 4.67, is here. And the P wrapped around to down here, but it's less than 0.0001. The R came from this last calculation that we did at the very end, which is way down here. The 0.61, which is a relatively larger effect size. So it shows that exercise does seem to have an effect. And then, once again, the means and standard deviations came from these descriptive statistics here. So this is the no exercise mean and standard deviation. And then in the next sentence, I talk about the playing contrast between 15 minutes and 30 minutes of exercise, and the means and standard deviations for that come from here and here. Also in the descriptive statistics. So the information for that second playing contrast comes from the second row right here, this exercise 15 versus 30. You can see the B value is 0.25, degrees of freedom still 36. The T value is 0.46, and then the P value is 0.65. And then finally, we looked at the R, which is 0.08, which is a very, very small effect size. So not a large effect, not a significant difference. So it would seem that the amount of time spent exercising does not have a effect on depression scores, just the actual act of doing some exercise. So that wraps up this specific assignment and this specific experiment. There would have been a lot more of the playing contrast to go through if there had been a significant interaction effect. So what I thought was going to happen, and this did not end up happening. I was expecting there to be some significant effects of friends as well as gender on exercise and the effect that it has on depression scores, but that did not seem to pan out here. All I found was that gender and the presence of exercise, of doing some exercise, both impact depression scores, but it seems to be independently rather than one influencing the other. And the presence of friends does not seem to play a role at all. So that is it and wraps up this assignment.